Hey, so the video you're about to watch was actually my presentation during one of the ClickUp AI webinars that we just recently did together with the ClickUp team. And I'm speaking about how to stop being human search engine in your company and how to solve that problem using ClickUp AI, ClickUp Documents, and ClickUp Chat feature. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks, Trish, and thanks everyone who's joining the webinar, guys. Thanks for your attention. In this short presentation, I'll try to give you an example of how can we use ClickUp Chat, ClickUp AI, and ClickUp Documents together to solve one big problem that many of us are facing. And before I jump into ClickUp features and kind of share my screen and show you everything, I want to mention a story that happened to me like just recently. I had a conversation with a business owner, and he told me that he's literally a human search engine in his company. And I feel like that relates to basically almost everyone who is running a business. Many of us become this human search engine, and what he meant was every time someone had a question, they would come to him and ask him the question. They would send an email, ask him a question. They would give him a phone call or knock on his door or whatever the case is. However they were trying to get hold of him, they were trying to ask those questions over and over and over again. And he was saying like, I'm spending so much time answering those questions. And the problem is that most of them I've already replied before and I've given those answers before. So I need to repeat myself. In addition to this, every time someone's asked me a question, it kind of breaks my momentum in the day. So imagine, again, as a business owner or manager, I think you can relate to that. You're doing something and then someone comes up with this question and says, hey, for example, hey, Ilya, like, can you help me with this? Like, what do I do in this situation? It's kind of an important question or a priority question. And you lose that momentum in the day and your personal productivity goes to waste. In order to solve this, I kind of put together a couple of versions of how we can use ClickUp to remove business owner or business manager, whatever role you play in the business, from being that human search engine. And before we dive into, and I share the screen, I want to mention one more thing, which is interesting. I found in this book, which is called Yes, I think the subtitle is 50 Scientifically Proven Ways to Be Persuasive. I highly recommend this book if you want to read it. It's like, for business owners, for salespeople. And there is one thing that I noticed very interesting and that relates to this discussion is it says when we are giving too many choices to our customers or to whoever we're dealing with, people tend to either delay or not make any decision at all. I believe this is what happens with AI right now for us, right? When we're looking and we're searching for different news, there are so many different ways of using AI for the business. Like you've heard of OpenClaw and you've heard of Claude and you've heard of ChatGPT and there are ClickUp AI features. So you feel like overwhelmed with all of that. And at the end of the day, because of so many options, we tend to procrastinate or not make any decision at all. This is why I feel so many of us, me including, are not employing AI as much as we could and not making AI as helpful as we could in our businesses. And why I'm saying this is because if you're already using ClickUp and you already like using ClickUp, right, for your project management, or maybe you started with your ClickUp Chat feature or Documents, ClickUp gives us a kind of limited, in comparison to what is available out there on the internet, limited selection of AI features that are very simple, straightforward, and can be extremely helpful. So I feel like if you're already using AI, it just makes our life so much easier because we are not feeling so overwhelmed and we can clearly understand how to implement AI little by little with simple steps, right, to make it really helpful in the business. All right, so instead of talking, I'm going to show you the two versions and two different ways of what I put together with that business owner of how we can use ClickUp Chat, ClickUp AI, and ClickUp Documents to help you not be human search engine, as I mentioned, in the business. The first, and I broke it down into two parts. The first part, we're going to be talking about the reactive kind of system, and the other one is proactive system. I'm going to explain in a second what that means. So what I like to do is when it comes to using ClickUp Chat, imagine, again, as I mentioned at the beginning, as a business owner or business manager, you're getting a lot of messages from different places. Email, Slack, WhatsApp, phone calls, someone knocking on your door. And what happens is with ClickUp Chat, and what I usually suggest people do is they put together a simple channel that's focused on one process in the company. Let's say, we're developing websites, which is one of the examples I put here. So I would put a single channel, I would call it a web development Q&A channel, and then everyone who has a question can post his question in that channel. What happens is we start sending questions, people start asking questions. I start replying to those questions as a business owner or business manager. But what happens now is not only, even though I reply still manually, my answers and all the context that we're discussing about this topics is staying inside ClickUp, which becomes extremely valuable. Because before that, you had that in email and in Slack and again in WhatsApp. It was in all those places, but not in ClickUp. So you couldn't actually utilize that information inside your project management tool. So here, when you're keeping that communication inside one place, that makes it easier for ClickUp to help you reply to those questions moving forward. And what I mean by this, and again, this is just a simple example I put together. Obviously, in real world example, you're going to have it a little bit messier, but still, someone asks a question, you reply in a thread. So for example, I say, when we start a new project, what page do we usually begin first or design first? And I say, we always start with a homepage first. All right. The other question was, where do we collect our logos? And I say, well, we collect it in our Google Drive. This is how we do things. So that whenever a month goes by, 2 months goes by, now instead of asking questions inside the chat, your people can now communicate with ClickUp AI because ClickUp now has all the context of what you answered and all your answers inside this chat. So instead of asking question in the chat and again bothering you one more time with maybe the question that you've already asked in the past, now the person can just simply come here, go to Ask ClickUp, and again, this is how you use ClickUp Brain, and simply ask a question. And over here, by the way, it actually suggests some of the questions. It says, where do we store client logos? Let me ask this question. And again, as it's thinking, it's probably pulling information from all the previous discussions. In this case, we just have a few, but in your example, it will be probably many more questions and answers. And then it gives me the response. It says, client logos are stored in the asset folder in Google Drive. Perfect. And this is the conversation that describes this. So again, whenever you're storing all your conversations in ClickUp, and this is kind of the biggest benefit of using chat in ClickUp, because now as your information and context is in ClickUp, you can communicate with the tool and ask those questions instead of bothering other people. All right. And this relates to your team as well as to you when you're asking some questions. Again, instead of posting a message over here, you can just simply ask ClickUp Brain first, takes a couple of seconds. And then if it doesn't provide you a good result or a good answer, you come in here and you ask the question. So again, the reason I'm calling this a reactive system is because ClickUp here plays a reactive role. It's not proactively answering the question, but it's basically answering the question only when you ask it, right? So it gives takes all the context that it has in here in the chat or in the specific channel. And again, when you're asking ClickUp Brain about the question, it spits out the response. This is a reactive way, again, of removing yourself from being that human search engine and replacing yourself with ClickUp AI and ClickUp Chat. All right, so this is option number one. The second option that I wanted to share with you was a more proactive way of doing this. And what I mean by this is instead of now communicating back and forth in the chat inside ClickUp, right, and giving those responses, what you can do, you can think ahead of time, what could be all the questions that people are asking about the process. Again, you've probably been doing whatever you're doing for a long period of time. So you understand how the work is done. You understand all the step-by-step processes, all the workflows in your company. So instead of, waiting for someone to ask the question, why don't we just put together context first, and then people can simply ask AI, again, just by posting comment here in the chat. I'm going to show you how this works with the super agent. But this way, we're combining three functionalities. We're combining ClickUp Chat, ClickUp Super Agent, who's going to be replying to the messages, and ClickUp Documents, where we're going to be storing the context. This is why, and again, whenever I'm putting together something in ClickUp or I'm building or implementing ClickUp, I highly suggest, and I use the Process First ClickUp framework, which I've kind of built over the last years. I'm not going to dive into this right now because it's not the topic, but I just wanted to mention this because when you're building your ClickUp and your ClickUp structure and your ClickUp chats around a specific process, and when you understand what that process is, and you're answering this first question, which is the step number one, how is work happening right now? And then we basically outline step by step of how the work is happening, right? Or what are all the steps of the process? You can literally look at this diagram and decide what are all the questions that people are probably going to have by going through this process, right? So for example, if I have a step here that says, post a job on Indeed, someone will probably ask me sooner or later, how do I do this on Indeed, right? Or where do I find my credentials and all of that? So instead of, again, being reactive and building a system that's reactive, when someone asks a question, you have to reply to it, or then only ClickUp has that context, you can be proactive and you can build that documentation around the process before someone has the question. So again, this is the process first framework. And by the way, I have here 4 different steps of how I design ClickUp structures and how I build ClickUp for the company. So I'm going to send some resources at the end in the comments so you can have access to this. But back to our conversation about ClickUp Chat and AI. Here, in order to be proactive, what we can do, we can put together 3 simple documents. And over here, you can see I put them under my space. Again, you can structure them a little bit differently. But the point here is I put documents that describe the process. The first one says website development process, standard workflow. If I go here, you can see it basically describes all the steps and some details about the steps. The other one says how to add a new page to a website project. So again, one of the questions that pops up consistently. And I have also the client feedback workflow, right? Again, this probably describes how do we communicate with the client when we need feedback from them, right? And this describes step by step of what's going on. So now instead of me answering those questions over and over again, or people bothering and again asking ClickUp AI questions, they can simply post a single comment or a single message in the chat. And this is, I have web development Q&A proactive chat, right? Over here, and I can say, what page do we usually design first when we start a new website project? Again, the same simple question, but now instead of putting or taking context from the previous conversations, it actually pulls information from the documentation that I put in here. And now it says, short answer, we usually start with a homepage. And this is the document that fully describes that. It gives you the reference, so your people can go and check the full explanation and documentation on how this step should be done if they need more context. If not, if this is enough, that we're good to go. But basically at this point, the system becomes more proactive because now you're asking the question and the system already has that answer because you've put together and built your ClickUp around the process, a specific process, and you kind of predicted all the questions that are coming up. Now, obviously, I understand real life happens, and you're probably not going to have all the questions that people will have documented in ClickUp, and you should not have all of them. Like, it's going to be a very tedious work to write down every single possible question. But the point is to have enough context in ClickUp so that ClickUp can analyze that information and maybe suggest a reply. Maybe you're not going to reply a specific question or give a response in the documentation here to a very specific question, but by giving ClickUp context, it can decide what the possible reply could be. And again, you can configure that ClickUp agent. I don't have enough time right now to dive into all the details, but if you go here to the AI section, I built this agent and I gave him instruction of how it should behave, right? What kind of answers it should provide, what documentation it should consume. You can see these documents I mentioned over here. And again, it just mentions what documentation you should consider when replying to the question that is specific to this business process. So again, that's just an example of how you can do this. Obviously, when I build this and I designed it here, is just a very simple version of it. So you can modify it and you can adjust it to how you'd like to use it and do your specific use case. But I hope this gives you a better understanding of, again, how to use ClickUp Chat with AI, with documents in ClickUp to remove yourself from being the human search engine in the company. All right, in a second, I'm going to share a couple of free resources in the comment section. I hope, guys, you enjoyed this presentation, and I'll give it back to Trish. Thank you, guys.